The house felt heavier than usual, burdened by a silence that pressed against the thin walls like a thick fog. Lily sat on the creaky wooden floor of the small living room, her eyes fixed on the faded photograph of her mother. It was the only reminder she had of the woman who had cradled her through childhood, and who had whispered lullabies beneath a sky full of stars. But that was before the sickness took her away, leaving an ache so deep it seemed to hollow Lily's very soul. The absence was a silent shadow, creeping into every corner of their modest home. Her father, a man worn down by years of toil, returned from the factory each evening with tired eyes that rarely met hers. His hands were calloused and rough, evidence of his ceaseless labor, but they trembled sometimes, betraying the exhaustion that no amount of sleep could ease. He tried to smile for Lily and her younger sister Maya, but the weight of responsibility crushed his spirit. He was the sole anchor in a sea of hardship, struggling to keep their fragile family afloat. Then, one chilly autumn afternoon, everything shifted. The door creaked open, and a new figure stepped inside, a woman whose presence stirred a whirlwind of emotions that Lily could neither name nor contain. Hannah, her father's new wife, moved with quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the humble surroundings with a mix of curiosity and calculation. She spoke softly, but her voice carried a steely edge beneath the surface, as if she was already setting rules for a world she intended to control. Lily watched, heart pounding, as Hannah offered a small smile to Maya, who clung to their father's leg, unsure whether to welcome or fear this stranger. Lily's stomach twisted with a strange knot, part hope, part dread. Maybe, she thought, this woman could fill the empty space left by her mother. But deep down, she sensed that the peace she longed for might be slipping through her fingers like fine sand. Days turned into weeks, and the subtle shifts began. Hannah took over the kitchen with brisk efficiency, cooking meals with practiced hands and organizing the house in ways that made Lily feel both invisible and scrutinized. The warmth that once lingered in the air had been replaced by a cold precision, like frost creeping over delicate flowers. Their father smiled more often now, encouraged by Hannah's bright presence, but his smiles never reached his eyes when he looked at Lily. Lily clung to Maya's hand as they walked to school each morning, finding comfort in the sisterly bond that was becoming their last refuge. Yet even Maya seemed to change, her laughter more brittle, her gaze more distant. The shadows growing in their home whispered secrets Lily could barely understand. That family was no longer a safe place, but a battleground where love and loss collided. Through the long, lonely nights, Lily held tight to the photograph of her mother, wishing for a time when things were simpler, when her father's arms had felt like home. But with Hannah's arrival, that time felt like a distant dream, a fragile memory slipping away with every passing day. The morning sun filtered weakly through the cracked window, casting pale stripes across the worn wooden floor where Lily sat quietly, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. The silence in the house was suffocating, heavier than ever before, and Lily's heart beat with a cold fear she could not yet name. It was the day that everything changed. The day her world began to unravel in ways she had never imagined. Hannah stood in the doorway, her eyes sharp and unforgiving. The warmth that sometimes flickered in her gaze had vanished, replaced by a hard, unyielding resolve. "Lily," she said, her voice low and steady, "you will no longer go to school. You are needed here." The words hit Lily like a punch to the chest, a cruel verdict that crushed the fragile hopes she had carried for a better future. Lily's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to plead, to cry out that school was her only escape, the one place where she could breathe without the weight of the world pressing down on her small shoulders. But no words came. All she could do was nod slowly, the tears burning behind her eyelids, unwilling to spill. Days before, her father had promised she could continue her studies, but Hannah's influence had woven a different fate for her. It was not out of cruelty, Lily told herself, but necessity, or so Hannah claimed. The money was tight, the bills piled high, and Maya's tuition had to come first. Lily was told she could help now, selling food on the street to ease the burden. "You don't contribute anything at school," Hannah had sneered, "so start pulling your weight." Lily's heart shattered into quiet pieces as she was handed a basket of steaming dumplings, wrapped carefully in banana leaves. The scent was familiar and comforting, but the weight of the basket was heavy in her arms, heavier than any lesson she had learned in school. She stepped out onto the busy street, the noisy chaos swallowing her small frame as she wove between the throng of faces. The street was unforgiving, filled with strangers who barely spared a glance, some brushing past her as if she were invisible, others hurling cruel words or harsh stares. She held her head high, forcing a smile that felt as fragile as a spider's web, her eyes darting anxiously for any sign of kindness. Each step was a battle between despair and determination. At school, the classrooms echoed empty now, the seats she once occupied cold and distant. Her books lay untouched on the dusty shelf, a silent reminder of the dreams she had been forced to abandon. Maya, her sister, still walked those halls, her laughter ringing out like a cruel melody, a reminder that Lily's world had shifted while hers stayed the same. Evenings were the hardest. Lily returned home exhausted, her body aching from standing all day, her spirit bruised by the weight of shame and solitude. Hannah's eyes scanned her with thinly veiled disdain, and her words were sharp when they came. "You're lazy if you complain. This is what you get for being useless." The sting of those words burned deeper than any scrape or cut. But somewhere beneath the pain, a quiet fire kindled within Lily, a flicker of resistance that no hardship could extinguish. She clung to the memory of her mother's gentle smile, to the hope that one day she might return to the classroom, to the life she once dreamed of. For now, though, the street was her new school, and the basket of food in her hands was her only lesson in survival. Micah often found himself trapped between memories he wished to forget and moments that refused to let go. The weight of the past clung to him like a shadow, growing longer with each passing day. Grace had once been the bright light in his life, a delicate thread of warmth that wove through even the darkest corners of his world. They had met in a time when hope still felt tangible, when the future whispered promises instead of threats. Their love had been a fragile thing, born from shared dreams beneath the sprawling oak tree in the park where they first met. Grace, with her gentle smile and eyes like pools of quiet resilience, had captivated Micah from the start. She carried herself with a soft grace that belied the storm she had weathered in silence, a past filled with pain and loss that she never fully revealed. To Micah, she was more than a lover. She was a sanctuary from the harshness that surrounded them both. But life had not been kind to their fragile happiness. When Grace became pregnant, the world they had built together trembled under the weight of harsh realities. Micah, barely scraping by with odd jobs and dreams deferred, felt the crushing pressure of responsibility. The tiny heartbeat they heard for the first time in the sterile white walls of the clinic was a beacon of hope, a new beginning that seemed to promise redemption and healing. Yet, beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Grace's delicate health faltered, and the demands of an unforgiving world began to erode the love that had once seemed invincible. Arguments erupted over money, over futures that seemed impossibly bleak, and over dreams that no longer aligned. Micah's pride battled with desperation as he tried to shield Grace from the storm that raged both outside and within their hearts. The night Grace left, carrying the weight of their unborn child and the hope for a better life, was etched into Micah's soul with unforgiving clarity. She had whispered promises of reunion, of forgiveness, but those words dissolved into the cold air as she disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind a silence that roared louder than any words could. Micah stood in the empty apartment, his hands trembling, the echoes of her footsteps haunting the hollow space where their future had been. For years, Micah searched for Grace, piecing together fragments of her life like shards of broken glass. He learned that she had faced hardship beyond imagining, days spent begging for coins on busy streets, nights sheltered in cold doorways, always holding close the fragile hope for a reunion that never came. Yet even in the harshest moments, Grace's spirit burned bright. She had taken their child, a boy she named Elias, and vowed to protect him from the shadows that had threatened to consume their family. Micah's heart shattered each time he saw Elias, a living reminder of the love he lost and the pain he could not erase. The boy's innocent eyes mirrored Grace's quiet strength, a testament to the bond that had survived even the cruelest separations. Though Micah had been forced to watch from afar, his love for Grace and Elias never waned. It grew into a silent promise that someday, somehow, they would find their way back to each other. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the world was still and the past pressed close, Micah whispered their names into the shadows. Grace, Elias. Words carried on a fragile breath, a vow wrapped in sorrow and hope, echoing through the corridors of a life forever changed by love and loss. After years of living with longing and regret, Micah finally decided he could no longer stand by and watch Grace and Elias struggle in silence. A fire stirred within him, a fierce need to right the wrongs of the past and rescue the woman he had once loved and the innocent child growing up in the shadows of hardship. He began with the smallest steps, searching for clues about where Grace and Elias might be now. He wandered through neighborhoods, asked street vendors and passers-by about a woman selling lottery tickets with tired eyes and a quiet grace. Often, he was met with confusion, polite shrugs, or sympathetic glances. Some people murmured that lives like hers were too far gone to ever change. But Micah refused to give up. He poured his time and energy into extra work, saving every dollar he could, not for luxury or status, but to lift Grace and Elias out of the life they had been forced to endure. He reached out to charity organizations, asking them to help connect Elias with education and medical care, desperate to give the boy a chance at a better future. There were times when Micah would stand across the street, watching Grace from afar. Her days selling tickets under the harsh sun, her slow steps, the way she held Elias's hand so gently, all of it burned into his soul. She looked older now, more fragile, but there was still something quietly radiant about her, something that time and pain had not been able to erase. In her he saw courage, and in Elias he saw a life that might have been. Micah began to write letters, to Grace, to Elias, to the years they lost. He poured his heart into every word, writing of the life he had led without them, of the sleepless nights and the silent prayers, of the wish he carried every day to make things right. But he didn't yet have the courage to send them. They remained tucked in his drawer like fragile hopes waiting to be born. Still, he knew money alone couldn't fix what had been broken. What they needed was presence, a promise kept, a hand held through the storm. He yearned to be that presence. He wanted Elias to know his father's face, to walk beside Grace not in secret but in the open, as he should have all those years ago. But fate did not yield easily. There were walls between them, years of silence, hurt, and uncertainty. Each effort felt like reaching through fog. And yet Micah's heart held steady. Somewhere deep within, he believed there would come a day when Grace might look at him not with fear or bitterness, but with the flicker of hope. That belief, that fragile, unwavering hope, was enough to keep him going. For Grace, for Elias, for the man he still believed he could become. The days bled into one another like watercolors on a rain-soaked canvas. For Micah, each morning began with a quiet war inside his chest, a conflict between the overwhelming urge to rush to Grace and Elias, to hold them and never let go again, and the haunting fear that he had already lost the right to do so. He was a man split in half, pulled between hope and regret, caught in the relentless current of time and consequence. As news of Grace's worsening condition reached him through whispers and brief sightings, a tightness grew in his chest that never quite eased. She had begun coughing more often, her steps slower, her shoulders hunched with exhaustion. Micah noticed her once vibrant eyes growing dimmer with each passing week, as though life itself was retreating from her body in quiet surrender. She still smiled at Elias, still held his hand as they walked the same cracked sidewalks every evening, but Micah could see she was breaking. Elias too was changing. The boy no longer laughed the way he used to. There was a distant look in his eyes, as if even at his young age, he could sense the fragility of the world around him. He clung tighter to his mother, spoke less, and stared out of windows as though waiting for something, or someone, to finally arrive. Micah knew he had to act. But the question clawed at him in the silence of the night. How? Would Grace accept help from the man who had once let her go? Would Elias, who barely knew his face, understand that the stranger watching from afar was his father? The pressure was mounting from all directions. At work, his business partners questioned his distracted mind, his long absences, his late-night departures. Friends warned him against getting involved in the past, telling him to move on, to live the life he'd built. "You've worked too hard to throw everything away," one of them said. But what was the point of success, of wealth, of building towers that touched the sky, if the two people who mattered most to him lived in shadows beneath them? Micah stood at a crossroads he could no longer ignore. He had money, yes, influence, resources. But no matter how many buildings bore his name, they were empty shells compared to the life he had walked away from. The ache in his soul would not be soothed by profit margins or polished marble floors. It cried out for the warmth of Grace's voice, for the small hand of his son in his own. One night, as thunder rolled in the distance and the city drowned in the kind of rain that made the streets blur with memory, Micah sat in his study and made a choice. Not just to help. Not just to donate money from afar or offer vague promises. No. This time he would step forward. Fully. Honestly. Without masks. Without shame. He wrote a letter, not as Micah the businessman, but as Micah the man who once loved Grace beyond reason, the man who still loved her, and who loved Elias though he had never been allowed to say it aloud. He wrote of nights spent staring at the ceiling, of the dream that had never left him. A small home, just the three of them, the scent of pancakes in the morning and lullabies at night. He wrote not to beg for forgiveness, but to offer all he was. Broken, yes, but willing. The letter trembled in his hand as he walked beneath the streetlights, past the market stalls, and stopped in front of the small apartment where he knew Grace now lived. He didn't knock. Not yet. Instead, he slid the letter beneath the door and stepped back, his heart pounding like a drum that summoned both dread and destiny. Rain tapped gently on the window panes above him. Somewhere inside, Elias laughed softly in his sleep, a sound like sunlight cracking through a storm. And Micah, drenched and shivering but resolute, whispered into the night, "It's time." The rain that day came suddenly, pouring from a sky thick with secrets long buried. Micah stood beneath the canopy of an old tree, its gnarled branches offering little shelter, his heart thundering louder than the storm itself. Across the street he saw them, Grace and Elias, seated beneath a broken awning, their threadbare clothes clinging to their skin, the boy curled into his mother's side for warmth. The sight pierced something deep in Micah, a pain so raw it left him breathless. He could no longer wait in the shadows of his guilt. He stepped forward slowly, uncertainly, his footsteps splashing through puddles like echoes from a past he could never quite outrun. Grace looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment the world stilled. "Grace," he said, barely a whisper, but it reached her like a thunderclap. She stiffened. Her hand instinctively wrapped tighter around Elias, as if shielding him from a man she once trusted with her whole heart. "What do you want, Micah?" Her voice was soft but edged with a strength born from years of surviving alone. Micah's voice trembled. "I want to know my son. I want to know why. Why I never knew." Grace looked away, rain streaking her face like tears she no longer bothered to hide. Her silence was heavier than any words. Finally, after what felt like eternity, she spoke, her voice carrying both the tenderness of love and the weight of betrayal. "You want the truth," she said. "You deserve it. But it won't be easy to hear." Micah nodded, unable to speak. She took a breath and began. "After I left, I tried to tell you. I wrote letters, dozens. Called. I begged your friend, Calvin, to pass them on. But you never responded. Not once." Micah's eyes widened. "Calvin!" His voice cracked. "He told me you disappeared. That you'd left for good. That you didn't want me anymore." Grace gave a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. Only years of heartbreak wrapped in a single sound. "He lied to both of us. He came to me once, after Elias was born. Offered money to stay silent. Told me you had moved on. That you didn't need the mess of a woman like me. Or a child you never wanted." Micah staggered back as if struck. The truth settled over him like ice, like fire. Calvin. His oldest friend, his confidant, had betrayed him. Stolen from him the very heartbeat of his life. He told me you were unstable, Micah whispered, more to himself than to her. He said you ran away to escape me. Grace looked at him, her eyes softening now, though still filled with sadness. I never stopped loving you, Micah. Even when I hated you for abandoning us. Deep down I never stopped. But I thought you chose to forget us. Micah dropped to his knees before them, the rain soaking through his clothes, mixing with the tears that now poured freely. He reached out a trembling hand toward Elias, who clung to his mother with wide, uncertain eyes. I didn't know, he said, voice breaking. I didn't know I had a son. Grace, if I had known, I would have moved heaven and earth to find you both. Elias looked at him then, really looked, and something flickered in the boy's expression. Not trust, not yet, but a question. Possibility. Micah saw himself in those eyes, and in that moment, he felt both redeemed and condemned. Grace touched his shoulder gently. It's not too late, Micah. But you have to prove it to both of us. Words are no longer enough. He nodded, solemnly, reverently, as if being given one final chance by the universe itself. The truth had shattered the walls between them, but trust would take time. Time, patience, and a love stronger than the lies that had once torn them apart. As the rain began to soften into a drizzle, the three of them stood together in the quiet aftermath of revelation. The storm had passed, not just the one in the sky, but the one in their hearts. And from the wreckage of everything they had lost, something fragile and new began to rise. Hope.